I'm Sandy Buchanan. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. We are so pleased to welcome you all to Energy Finance 2023, Pathways to Accelerate the Global Energy Transition, or as this conference has come to be known, Going to IEEFA. We're so pleased to have over 400 attendees here over the next few days from 37 countries, and to be at this lovely conference venue in San Francisco. We hope that the new location means a few of you are a little less jet lagged this year. You know, we have focused this conference on finding solutions to accelerate the energy transition. There is no question that renewable energy is more economical, cleaner, safer, and more secure than fossil fuels, and that the technology is striding forward every day. And yet, technical, financial, and political barriers are standing in the way of the transition in many countries in the world. Global change becomes possible when many different communities, institutions, investors, utilities, corporations, and governments all take actions in their own way, leading the way for others around the world. We're very grateful that so many people with deep understanding of both the obstacles and the ways to overcome them have joined us over these next 2 days to share their experience and expertise with us. We're also very grateful for the funders who make this conference possible and who provide scholarships for people from nonprofit organizations to attend the conference. You know, our IEEFA team around the world is 70 people now in 14 countries, and some of us are meeting each other here for the first time. And it took this IEEFA global village to put this conference together, and I'd just like to thank everybody who contributed in so many ways. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you. I have a few logistical announcements before we get started. Our conference app is called SCED. You can download it on your phone if you haven't already. You can network with other attendees, see side sessions. If you have any trouble with that, the front desk can help you out. Also, there's signs posted with the agenda around the halls. Excuse my voice, I talked too much last night, I think. I'd like to remind you that all sessions are open to the press, and also that many of the sessions in this room will be recorded and posted on the IEEFA website next week. The meals will take place out here in the foyer. Feel free to take your lunch or your breakfast, take it to a meeting room. There's many side rooms upstairs as well as down here, and do that. And tonight's reception is going to be right here in the foyer. Last night was lovely, but I think people got a little chilly. So we really appreciate that the hotel shares our goal of making this a zero waste event. The hotel staff, who have been just wonderful to work with in all ways, are going to be sorting and recycling and composting behind the scenes, but you can help us by taking your dishes and placing them in the right places after the meals. You know, this annual event, now in its 13th year, has become a hub for people who share the firm conviction that understanding how financial levers work is key to accelerating the energy transition. We meet many wonderful people here every year, and we're lucky that this event is often the beginning of long-term partnerships. And that is certainly true for our moderator here this morning. We first met Vibhuti Garg when she attended the conference as with the International Institute for Sustainable Development 5 years ago. She then, soon after, joined IEEFA as our energy economist in India. And she has gone on to build a dynamic team of energy finance analysts and communications specialists who are tackling both the promise and the challenge of accelerating the energy transition in India and Bangladesh. So it's now my great pleasure to turn this over to Vibhuti. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, for these kind words, and a very good morning to all of you. I'm really pleased to have such a distinguished set of speakers along with me and a wonderful audience who is sitting right in front of me on day one. This session, I would say, is going to set the tone for the next 2 days of deliberation. term new energy economy. What it means is it's pushing more accelerated deployment of more and more cleaner technologies and sustainable economic choices that we are all trying to build as part of the new energy economy and shrinking role of fossil fuels. But it also means that there will be a lot of change in the global calculus. How are we defining the new balance of power? So we are seeing countries which have been ignored largely with fossil fuels are resisting this kind of a change because a lot of their revenues or their economic development depends on more and more extraction and more use of such fossil fuels. On the other hand, when we are looking at renewable energy technologies, we are also seeing now more and more countries not only trying to develop the renewable energy capacity in their countries, but they are also looking at expanding all the supply chain. So there's a lot of inward-looking scenarios that are also emerging as part of the new energy economy. So what does it mean? Does it really mean a change in the balance of power? Or also does it mean that countries, again, are going to be more collaborative in terms of sharing their technology, sharing their finances, because clearly we are seeing that this kind of development is also skewed in terms of most of the deployment as well as the investment is largely flowing to advanced economies. Whereas the development economies or the developing economies, which are the future of the globe, they are still struggling, and the pace at which the deployment needs to happen is not happening. So how are these politics going to change going forward? So in today's session, we will be talking about what kind of political resources need to be created, what role in public and private sector play in this whole deployment of technology as well as finance. So having board. He's currently heading one of the iconic, because none other state has come up, and Jharkhand is one of the first states in India who have set up a sustainable just transition task force, and he's chairing that task force and also the green hydrogen task force as well. Mr. Rastogi is an experienced climate expert and has represented the government of Jharkhand in various international conferences, including several COP meetings at UNFCCC. A warm welcome to you, sir. We also have Desiree Fixler, who's an advisor with RYSN Consulting. Desiree is recognized as an advocate for change and impact in the practice of ESG investing and sustainability. She works as a senior advisor to many financial institutions and is also a member of the Financial Conduct Authority's ESG Advisory Committee and is the chair of the Board of Venture ESG. Ms. Fixler is a frequent public commentator and provides expert insights on topics including ESG, greenwashing, and whistleblowing. Welcome you as well, Desiree. Now I'm going to hand it over to Tom Sanzillo, who is the director with IEEFA, to introduce Minister Ralph.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My job today is to introduce Minister Ralph Regan-Vanu from the Republic of Vanuatu. Before I do that, I have just one observation, really. This conference held annually, as Sandy said, over a decade now, and our purpose is clarity of thought to guide us in our direct and collective actions around climate change. We come together to remind ourselves of the nature of the problem, the scope of it, and increasingly the suffering it causes. We come together to wade through the information and misinformation that we all deal with every day and to try to figure out what direction to choose amidst all of the technological, financial, political changes. we come together also because we know that where you sit dictates a lot of how you see things, and how you see things determines what you consider fair and just. The essence of justice is that those who bear the burden of any solution must consider that burden to be fair. That's a pretty tough standard, but I think it's the one that we should adhere to. Minister Ralph Regan-Vanu is the Minister of Climate Change, Adaptation, Meteorology, and Geohazards, Energy, Environment, and Disaster Risk Management for the Republic of Vanuatu. I'd have a hard time getting up in the morning with that burden. Minister Regan-Vanu is currently serving his 5th term as a member of Parliament for Port Vila, the capital of Vanuatu, and has held a number of cabinet portfolios over the past decade, including lands and natural resources and foreign affairs. From 2013, he was co-chair of the National Sustainable Development Core Group, which was responsible for developing Vanuatu's National Sustainable Development Plan. In 2019, as Vanuatu's Minister of Foreign Affairs, he initiated Vanuatu's campaign to obtain an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on states' obligations to ensure the protection of the climate system and other parts of the environment for present and future generations. On March 29th this year, this was unanimously endorsed by the United Nations General Assembly. Increasingly, Minister Regan-Vanu is taking on the role of world leader, our leader on climate change. I've only just met him, but I see already a person of kindness, resourcefulness, and humility, the character that we need in leaders today to help us through these times. So please welcome Minister Ralph Regan-Vanu from the Republic of Vanuatu.
Good morning. It's an honor for me to address you this morning. As Tom says, I'm from Vanuatu, which is a small island developing state in the Pacific between Australia and Fiji, so you can go back and look it up on your map. We are ranked by the United Nations as the world's most at-risk country from natural hazards. And that's according to the World Risk Index put out by the UN. And it's not just a matter of exposure to climate-related hazards, which are increasing in intensity each year, but also the fact that we are on the ring of fire. And also it reflects the low level of development of the country, our capacity to respond to disasters. In 1992, over 30 years ago, Vanuatu was a founding member and inaugural chair of the Association of Small Island States, IOSIS. IOSIS was formed largely in recognition of the fact that greenhouse gas emissions from the use of fossil fuels was causing the planet to heat, which was changing the climate. The world had known this science long before that. IOSIS was formed as a lobby group to request the historical high emitters, the developed countries, whose development paths had consumed the fossil fuels that had caused the global warming, that were causing climate change, to provide assistance to the most vulnerable small island states that had contributed nothing towards causing the crisis and yet were feeling the brunt of climate change. It was Vanuatu, as the chair of IOSIS, that first called for a loss and damage fund in 1992. 30 years later, last December at COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, this loss and damage fund was agreed to, but it was still only the concept that was agreed to, with all operational aspects to be decided later. Fast forward to 2015, and it was the Pacific Small Island States at the 21st United Nations Climate Change Conference who pushed for the target of keeping global temperatures to below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial global temperature levels. That this goal was achieved in Paris is due to the ambition of the small island states. As we all know, countries were to submit their voluntary nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, to achieve the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions necessary to meet this target. Another goal that was approved by the 196 countries that adopted the Paris Agreement was that the developed countries would contribute a total of $100 billion by 2020 to a green climate fund, which the most vulnerable developing countries could use to mitigate their contribution to climate change by transitioning to renewable energy and to adapt their economies to withstand the worst effects of climate change. Fast forward to today, we have not met the targets set in Paris. Emissions reductions are not in line with achieving the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. In fact, we are way off, and now even limiting global heating to 2 degrees seems impossible. The monies contributed to the Green Climate Fund remain a fraction of the promised $100 billion. The latest IFCC report reads like a horror story. We all know we cannot keep taking fossil fuels out of the ground, but oil and gas companies, some of the most profitable companies in the world, continue to do so and implementing plans to continue opening new fossil fuel extraction projects for decades to come. And governments continue not only to allow this to happen, but they contribute to subsidize new fossil fuel production to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. The same countries that signed up to the Paris Agreement. For the small island states in the Pacific, the slogan 1.5 to stay alive is not an exaggeration. Today, Vanuatu's people suffer from the insidious rise in sea levels that eats away at our villages, ocean acidification that is dissolving our reefs, increasing sea surface temperatures, bleaching our corals and seagrasses, landslides that erase entire villages and plantations, and prolonged droughts that shrivel and kill our subsistence crops before they can even be harvested. Just a few months ago, Vanuatu was hit by 2 Category 4 cyclones in the space of 72 hours, the first time this ever happened. Thousands of people lost their homes and were left without the basic necessities to survive. Schools and clinics ripped from the foundations, infrastructure was washed away, food and water security has been severely compromised. It is estimated the cost of these twin cyclones is about 50% of our GDP. It is getting increasingly difficult to live safely in our countries anymore. Low-lying atoll countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati have already begun buying up land in other countries and moving their populations away from their ancestral homelands. This is unjust, as we are not responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing this crisis. Our fundamental rights as individuals and communities to live free from harm, and our rights as countries to develop sustainably, are being undermined by the failure of world leaders to stop the extraction of fossil fuels. We, children of Vanuatu, of the world, do not deserve this reality today or the terrifying future that is coming with expanding fossil fuel production. Whether it is the cyclones that have hit Vanuatu and New Zealand, or the flooding that has engulfed Pakistan, Rwanda, or Bangladesh, or the heat waves that have burned over the United States, Europe, and India, and many other regions of the world, make no mistake that fossil fuels are taking far, far too many lives, and this must end, particularly when you consider it's not just extreme weather wreaking havoc. 1 in 5 deaths around the world on an annual basis are due to the air pollution from fossil fuels. Oil, gas, and coal are today's weapons of mass destruction. And just as addressing the risk of nuclear weapons, landmines, and other threats to humanity required an unprecedented level of international cooperation, so does the job of phasing out fossil fuels and accelerating the adoption of clean, low-carbon solutions fall to us here today. For decades, Pacific nations, island communities, and indigenous leaders have been at the forefront of challenging fossil fuels. Civil society has been organising, marching, and engaging with governments, calling to get fossil fuels in the ground. Finance and divestment campaigns, like those many of you in this room have led and are leading, have had unprecedented success, moving over $1 trillion out of fossil fuel development. Renewable energy prices have plummeted, demand is soft and projected to decline in large part because of the introduction of policies like zero-emission vehicle targets that are resulting in an exponential rise in the purchase of electrical cars. Yet despite 30 years of negotiations and climate action, we are failing to reduce global emissions, failing to constrain new fossil fuel development. We cannot rely on the market. We cannot rely also on our current international forums, such as the UNFCCC, given our climate policies have focused on reducing demand for fossil fuels and reducing their emissions, while ignoring the problem of climate pollution from the supply side, the production of oil, gas, and coal. So while many countries, subnational and regional governments have been working hard to tackle the climate crisis, the industry has been left off the hook. There's not an energy transition if we continue to build out the problem, and that is exactly what many countries are doing. UNEP's production gap report shows that we are on track to produce 100% more oil, gas and coal than what the world can ever burn to stay under 1.5 degrees of warming and stay alive. It is urgent then that we stop the expansion of fossil fuel use and production and manage an equitable wind down in line with the science. The question is how. The timing of the cyclones in March was dramatically ironic. Just days later, on the 29th of March, my government led a 132-strong coalition of nations in securing an historic resolution at the UN General Assembly, asking the International Court of Justice to clarify the legal responsibility countries have for preventing climate harm to people and the environment. The resolution was adopted by consensus, the first resolution calling for an opinion from the International Court of Justice to ever be adopted by consensus, and the court has begun its hearings. First submissions from states and intergovernmental organizations are due by the 20th of October, and we expect a ruling in the second half of next year. When we initiated this effort for this advisory opinion from the ICJ on climate change, no one thought it would get anywhere, but here we are. In March also this year, Vanuatu hosted a meeting of Pacific ministers to address fossil fuels and climate change. This ministerial meeting resulted in the Port Vila call for a just transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific, where ministers and officials from the Kingdom of Tonga, the Republic of Fiji, Niue, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu and Vanuatu agreed to no longer accept the lies of the fossil fuel industry. As leaders on behalf of present and future generations, communities on the front line and all of humanity, we committed to 1, spearheading the global phase-out of coal, oil and gas production in line with global temperature goal of below 1.5 degrees Celsius, including at the UN Secretary-General's Climate Summit in September, at COP28 and beyond. 2, joining the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance and urging major oil and gas producers to join. 3, calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and lead the creation of a global alliance to negotiate a new treaty to govern the end of fossil fuel expansion, equitable phase-out of fossil fuels, and a global just transition. And 4, redoubling efforts to reaffirm, strengthen, and codify legal obligations with respect to the global phase-out of fossil fuels, including through an advisory opinion on climate change from the International Court of Justice. 5, avoiding terminology such as unabated or inefficient that creates loopholes for fossil fuel producers and polluters. 6, disclosing fossil fuel investment projects and demanding that all governments do the same through the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and the Global Registry of Fossil Fuels. And 7, advocating for expanded public and private finance for the just transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy at the pace and scale required with reforms of existing financial mechanisms. And last month, in May, Vanuatu hosted the 5th Pacific Regional Energy and Transport Ministers meeting. 20 Pacific states and territories participated in the meeting, including Australia and New Zealand. And the outcome statement from that meeting called for the Port Vila call to be enabled and implemented and formally endorsed by the Pacific Island Forum leaders at their annual summit in November. The meeting also agreed to pursue a unified, urgent, strong and regional position to phase out fossil fuels and to collaborate to strengthen international legal frameworks that motivate decarbonisation and the mobilization of adequate climate finance, including through the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. This work will be advanced through the creation of a Pacific Energy Commissioner for a just transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific, supported by leading technical experts and a regional task force, and funded by allies for a fossil fuel-free world, to be formalized by Pacific Island Forum leaders also in November. The Pacific Islands are determined to be first movers as we are out of time and our lives depend on it. Vanuatu's current priorities build on the strong history of climate leadership from Pacific Island nations, and yet we cannot go it alone. We need other nations, including wealthy fossil fuel producing nations, to be part of the actions outlined in the Port Vila Call, including being part of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which can provide this treaty can provide the missing international mechanism to facilitate an energy transition in a way that is fair, fast, and sufficiently financed. Equity and justice is key. Wealthy fossil fuel producing countries that are largely responsive to the climate emergency must take the lead in phasing out fossil fuels and supporting countries like mine to do so with funding and technical assistance. Yet this will not happen without the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, because without an international agreement, each producing nation will continue to argue they should be the last one to produce the last barrel of oil because they can produce it in a clean way. They tout being part of the climate solution, using arguments that are based on unproven technologies, such as capturing carbon pollution and storing it, which, even if they were proved effective, would not eliminate the need to move away from fossil fuels. What we are hearing from these nations and these companies is quite simply climate washing, greenwashing, and it's time to call their bluff. Momentum for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is growing. Vanuatu and Tuvalu were the first countries to endorse the call for the treaty and bring resolutions into United Nations processes, and now 6 countries in the Pacific have formally endorsed it. Vanuatu and Tuvalu will be hosting a meeting at the Climate Action Summit in New York in September and a side event during the General Assembly in the same month to promote the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we believe that by that time we will have more states signed up. There are also more than 550 parliamentarians across the world that have called for a treaty to phase out fossil fuels and fast-track a fair energy transition, and more than 80 cities and subnational governments representing jurisdictions on every continent of the globe, including some of the biggest centres such as Calcutta, India, and of course the Senate in California also passed this resolution. We are joined by 101 Nobel laureates, more than 2,000 civil society organisations, hundreds of health officials and institutions, including the World Health Organization, more than 1,000 religious groups, including the Vatican, as well as Indigenous youth and business leaders. You may be sceptical that leaders from small countries that are not fossil fuel producers could join with this growing movement to compel action towards a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. But history tells us otherwise. From landmines to the ozone, nuclear weapons, and asbestos, major transformation typically starts outside of the halls of where the status quo meets. Willing first mover countries move hand in hand with civil society, create pressure from the outside on existing systems until the need to act is undeniable and cannot be ignored. Pacific Island leaders are the first to raise the alarm about the impacts of climate change, as the lands we know and places we call home were being and continue to be inundated with water. The world listened, and that helped us to spur the adoption of the Paris Agreement. Now we are saying, let's move quickly to clean, abundant energy from the wind, sun, and water. Let's stop building out the problem by ending the expansion of fossil fuel production. And let's wind down what we have to manageable levels that we can survive, because the world can't tolerate any more oil, gas, and coal if we want not only to survive, but have a future. We are not ahead of our curve. We are right where we need to be, and we question other calculations. For those who may think that the process towards a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty will take too long, I say there is no more time for business as usual, and we must find another way forward quickly. Think about how the world responded to COVID-19, and think about the scale and conviction which we mobilized to fight another senseless war in Europe. It's completely possible to act when there is a will. By stopping fossil fuel expansion, planning a scale down in production, and supporting a just transition to a low carbon system that provides energy access and sustainable development for all. Join us in calling for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and in moving your countries and economies to health, security, and a viable and rewarding life for all. I thank you.
Definitely it needs a much louder applause. Thank you, Minister Ralph, for pointing out some of the issues and various actions that are being undertaken. And yes, the small island nations, including some other countries, have been more at the receiving end, despite not contributing to this climate crisis. But it is very encouraging to see how, through your efforts, you are leading by example by shifting to much more clean energy deployment, as well as through international platforms like COP, International Court of Justice, making a case for all the island nations. So that's very, very remarkable. Now, moving on to the fireside chat, and we have our other esteemed speakers along with me. I just want to begin with this. How do we assess the ongoing problem of fossil fuels, and what should be our collective responses? How is the current geopolitics playing out, whether in favor or against this development of new energy economy? And how are the dynamics of this new energy economy impacting the perspectives of both the government as well as the companies that must, manage these climate patterns as well as the changing investment patterns that are required to build this new energy economy. I will start with you, Mr. Sogi, if you can share it from the perspective of the government, and then you, Desiree, from the corporate perspective.
Thank you, Vibhuti. If you look at from what perspective, energy produced out of coal or fossil fuel is losing its charm because solar energy is becoming cheaper day by day. It is the economic consideration apart from environment consideration which is driving the force. And majority of the country, if you look at, they want their energy security because last what we have seen interrupted supplies to Europe, which has affected the energy security. So what is the way out? Move away from fossil to non-fossil fuel economy, whether you want it or not, because we are committed, planet has to be habitable, you have to contain your temperature by 1.5 degree. So the only alternative is reduce the portion of fossil fuel in your energy, and that is possible by solar, could be wind energy, geothermal energy, hydropower. So these are becoming a biofuel. See, a lot of initiative has been taken by India that we are already committed by 2030, 500 gigawatt, and 50% of energy mix will be from renewable energy. So that's a great shift because till now it is around 74% energy mix coming from fossil fuel energy. So it is a gradual migration from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel economy because overnight it is not possible. So you have to have gradual approach, and India has adopted that approach. Second, it is the security. If you are like what we have seen in recent time, when your supply is stopped or your supply is affected by due to external regions, how do you meet that energy requirement? That is very, very important. And India is spending huge amount of import of fossil fuel. So if we develop our own RE potential, we are going to be self-reliant, and then energy will be, that will be energy security for the country. I think that geopolitics which is taking place, people have understood the importance of RE and importance of energy security in entire economic consideration, because India being a developing nation, there will be energy demand. Every year it is projected the 3% energy demand will be growing. How to meet it? You have to escalate your RE potential, you have to meet your targets much ahead of the time what we have mentioned. So we are trying to focus on renewable energy and moving away from fossil to non-fossil fuel. I think India is committed to achieve its target much before time. It's not only that RE potential we are going to extract, it's about indigenous technology for PV voltaic cell manufacturing in the country. That is also because that will also drive for economic improvement in the country. So that's what we are trying to do. And we are trying to support other nations also, those who are willing, because International Solar Alliance, India is driving that. So we'll be willing to support. From my state perspective, we are also trying to move away from fossil to non-fossil, because our economy in the state, in the province of Jharkhand, is dependent on coal, majority of the coal. So that is why we are trying to move away from fossil to non-fossil. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm a former investment banker, and then I was chief sustainability officer at Deutsche Bank's asset management division. It was my dream job. The asset manager was running close to $1 trillion of assets under management. truly global across all asset classes. And I thought, wow, what impact, $1 trillion. I lobbied my CEO, my boss was the CEO of the company, and I lobbied him in, it was the fall of 2020, to sign up to the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. So, you've got GFANS, and, there are all these different subcommittees, for insurers, for asset managers, for the banks, to all pledge. It's a voluntary initiative, and you pledge to be Paris-aligned in running your company and in running your assets under management. So you're pledging to go net zero. And so I petitioned my CEO, we should be, a founding signatory to this initiative. And I was struggling because internally, we were coming out with a lot of products, climate action products, ESG products, SDG-aligned products to sell to customers, but we didn't have any sort of climate strategy. We didn't have a fossil fuel policy. We didn't have a coal policy. And I thought, wow, by signing up to Net Zero Asset Management Initiative, I could finally, focus everyone's attention, and we'll have to do it. This is a commitment, it's a public commitment. So I was actually quite pleased, but also surprised that my CEO said, sure, I'll sign. So off we went, and we were one of the, I think 12 or 18 signatories to sign up. And so, the next day I'm like, great, let's form a committee. We need to, draft our own, let's start with, a coal policy to phase out coal. And the CEO said, just no way. Right? There was tremendous pushback. And so I was what I call well-intentioned, but clueless, absolutely clueless. And the CEO spotted the arbitrage here, that in all of these net zero pledges, you can kick the can, down the road. All you needed to do is identify your carbon light assets. You didn't have to tackle your fossil fuel problem. So, the 80-20 rule, what we figured out, in asset management is that something like 10 to 15% of our investments were actually responsible for 90% of our carbon emission profile across all these assets. That's what we needed to tackle. Right? So I'm focused on that, the dirty, 10 to 15%, energy companies, mining, materials, transportation. And what the CEO realized is that all you needed to do is identify your investments in Apple, Microsoft, some green real estate, investments. And that's all you have to do under these pledges, under net zero. You just simply identify carbon light, and you can put out a statement. Look, already, 30% of our, assets under management are already aligned to go net zero. And it's business as usual. You didn't lift a finger. You didn't do anything. You can even, there have been studies, you can even up your investments in fossil fuels. And that's what happened. So this whole net zero thing, this is what happens with voluntary initiatives. Now look, there's some well-run companies out there, I have no doubt. But the vast majority of banks and asset managers today have pledged to go net zero only for the PR kudos, right? They're flying a net zero flag because they know there's tremendous investment demand for climate action products, for impact products. But again, they don't have to change anything. This has just become a big money machine. Anywhere from 10 to 40% of net new inflows for big asset managers are going into ESG type products. And without government initiatives, right, voluntary actions will fail. I think GFANS, and they had this banner, $132 trillion pledged, to tackle climate change. It's BS. So, and I think that GFANS could probably be the greatest example of greenwashing. Again, we have made strides. There is tremendous awareness, but governments need to do more. Capital markets will not solve this problem, and greenwashing is prevalent. Lip service and greenwashing, absolutely prevalent. So, we need more government action, and I do believe that's coming. We've seen the SEC already make 4 enforcement actions against companies for greenwashing. So it's the combination of government action, and that's regulation, enforcement, legislation, giving the capital markets guardrails, And then you can harness the might and power of the capital markets to tackle these problems.
Thanks, Desiree. I love your passion, and we definitely need more videos like this. Minister Ralph, I will now turn to you. If you can share, what are the new governance structures, technologies, and policies that are needed to take us through this transition?
In the Pacific, we also use, obviously, fossil fuels, and we need to transition from them, and we need financial assistance to help us, so we need technologies to help us. And that was the sort of agreement of Paris, was that there would be this assistance for that transition. So we basically need the climate finance that has been pledged. We need access to the technologies. As I said in my speech, that's not happening fast enough. And instead, we're seeing most of the money going to continued subsidies. So I think we really need to tackle that issue of retargeting the subsidies, and that requires interstate action. We've just finished the pre-COP meetings in Bonn, and they were very disappointing. We're trying to get the UNFCCC, the COP28 coming up. We're trying to get a fossil fuel phase out actually included in that for the first time. It may be difficult to believe, but all this time they've never talked about fossil fuel phase out at COP. And so it's going to be an uphill battle, but we're building that alliance right now to see that happen. But I think the technology and the resources are definitely there, but we just need access to them.
Thank you. Turning back to you, Mr. Rastogi, I mean, Jharkhand as a state has some of the India's largest as well as varied mineral resources. How do you think these resources will position the state of Jharkhand for growth as part of the energy transition?
If you look at from India's perspective, Jharkhand confines to the eastern part of the country, and which hosts 40% mineral reserve of the country. We are supplying at present 30% coal to the country need. We have hematite. We are the second largest reserve of iron ore. Then we have uranium. This biggest uranium mines in Jharkhand we have. We have copper, and we have aluminium, and we have graphite. For energy transition, if we have to move, copper, aluminium, graphite is going to be very, very crucial. If you don't talk about nuclear energy, which has got certain advantages and disadvantages, but these minerals are going to be very, very crucial. So far, focus was on coal and steel mining. Now, more sustainable approach is required, and we are developing that approach for mining of these critical mineral, which is going to be very, very important for energy transition. Either it has to be grid, it has to be wires, it has to be the battery. You require these minerals. And we'll be developing that economy, and it's going to be really very, very important. We are almost one of the largest producers of these minerals. Nearby states like MP, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha, we are also producing these minerals. Jharkhand will contribute towards sustainable mining of these. Emphasis was not that much, but because once we have to transit, to focus will be much more on mining of these minerals sustainably. And the energy requirement for mining purposes will be from renewable sources, that interstate grid, laying out a grid or smart grids, that is going to be the focus of the state, so that we do not use fossil for mining of these minerals, so that we attain our net zero target much earlier than what we are in receives. Yeah.
As part of the task force, if you can share some more insights, how you are addressing the risk and challenges within the energy transition, whether it
relates to economic diversification, whether it's supply chain, trade, investments, international cooperation.
Jharkhand, as I said, we have 26% country's coal reserve and we supply 30% coal to the country. And coal and allied activity is contributing towards the economy of the state. 3/4 of the state is dependent on coal-based ecosystem. Whether it is coal mining, whether it is hard-to-abate industry, a lot of steel industry which consumes a lot of coal, which has come up in Jharkhand. And we are the only state in the country which produces coking coal, which is required for steel manufacturing. So moving away from coal-based ecosystem to non-fossil fuel-based ecosystem is a challenge for the state, for the province. The task force has been constituted by the government to assess the magnitude. It's not about open source, it is about data and science. See, once we have to estimate what is going to be how do we attain our net zero, we should know how much is the emission, then how to reduce it. Prepare a policy, prepare state government, arm state government to give recommendation, what kind of a policy changes will be required, what kind of intervention will be required. It's not only about tackling coal. That idea is coal transition, energy transition is going to be only one aspect, because if you do not take care of the people, it is about informal sector, which is much more, when I said coal-based ecosystem, so it is not the formal sector as compared to in Western world or global north. It is the informal sector which is going to be impacted by transition, coal as well as energy transition. So what we are trying to do under this task force, we will prepare economic diversification plan for the district, those who are dependent. So what kind of a new economy which can sustain, what kind of a greener jobs could be created by, whether it is RE, whether it is biofuel. When we move away from fossil fuel to non-fossil based economy, there will be a lot of land mass will be available. How do we reclaim that? What kind of a jobs can be created? So that it is not that abruptly we close everything. It's about time we will take to close those minings, but how to utilize those areas, how to economically diversify that area. That is going to be the main aspect of our assessment. Second is a lot of policy changes may be required, a lot of tweaking in different laws, a lot of financing will be required, the assessment of how much finance will be required. So what kind of a decarbonization policy is required, because as I said, we have hard-to-abate industry. So we cannot achieve net zero unless we support our industry, bigger industries as well as medium and small scale industry, a lot of steel manufacturing, crude steel manufacturing industry is there in Jharkhand. So how to support them to move from blast furnaces to either DRI, what kind of whether hydrogen can contribute, electrification, and I think that's the only route which is available. So you clean your electricity, clean your industry. That's going to be the key. So prepare a roadmap to attain net zero in the state. And to that, assessment is required. You read finance, as Honorable Minister has said, for any climate action you need finance. So that then what kind of a gap funding will be there, whether it is going to be the more devolution, whether it is going to be the aid, how much it's going to cost to the state. So it's overall taking care of the people and diversifying the economy from fossil fuel based economy to non-fossil fuel economy, and empowering people, because once they lost their job while you migrate from fossil to non-fossil, what kind of a capacity building will be required? Maybe that you require upskilling, skilling will be required of the people, those who are not in the formal sector. Formal sector is about, if we assess, is about roughly an estimate is I can say for entire country it could be 0.3 million, but informal sector is in Jharkhand is much higher. So we had to create a roadmap for their livelihood so that they can sustain their livelihood, creating alternatives within the state, assessing RE potential, and second is how the energy demand will be there. How to assess your energy demand, because once you move away from fossil-based economy, your energy mix, your demand will be much different from the country demand. So assessing that what we are trying to assess, and that's the role of the task force, and this is an initiative taken by the Jharkhand government, one of its kind in the country. We are trying to tackle not only one aspect, we are trying to tackle the entire aspect so that it becomes sustainable and just for the people also. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie financed investments is at the core of this discussion. So how should we assess the evolving corporate response and strategies to address climate change?
Well, I mean, look, the banking and asset management industry knows that there's a tremendous growth opportunity here, right? So, initiatives like, although it's not perfect, the Inflation Reduction Act, and, there are lots of incentive schemes in Europe as well as there are in other countries around the world. It's the best way to focus the attention of the capital markets, to do the right thing. So it's the carrot and stick, what I see. Right now you have a situation where there is no doubt, take a JP Morgan, great company, right? And they're doing quite a bit to finance the transition economy. But at the same time, right, they're the biggest financer of fossil fuels. And of course, everyone's saying right now, like, oh, because of the energy security issue and the war, we have no choice but to stay here. Actually, I mean, from already, fossil fuel projects that are already in existence, fair enough, but there is no justification to break new ground on greenfield fossil fuel projects. That money can go into renewable energy and clean technology projects. So again, it's going to be business as usual until we get, I'm afraid to say, like the inevitable policy response, right, where things get so bad that governments, like with COVID, have to act. And that's when you'll see, more of an effort. I mean, look, we've made some strides in that, particularly in my case, the DWS case, corporate executives got the memo, don't greenwash, don't exaggerate, don't mislead, right? It's a cautionary tale. We can now quantify the cost of greenwashing. Just take DWS. What happened? I raised my concerns internally about greenwashing. I got fired. The whole case became public, and it culminated in 50 federal police agents raiding Deutsche Bank's headquarters and DWS's headquarters. It eviscerated the C-suite. Market cap collapsed one day, down almost 14%. And just recently, they've disclosed that they've spent upwards of $40 million already on legal expenses to defend themselves with the 6 regulatory regimes coming at them. And remember that these are both civil and criminal investigations, into greenwashing. The German police, I think, did more to advance the climate agenda than anyone else, than the 183, new regulations from the EU. Right? And I had so many, C-suite people reach out to me to say, we were following your case, but holy shit, Des, when the police raided, headquarters, it was, a lot of executives called all hands on deck meetings, right, to get to the bottom of it, to see if they were greenwashing. So some folks say that we've moved from greenwashing to green hushing and that corporate executives are now backing off the green agenda. I don't see that at all. Not at all. But what has happened is, thankfully, a lot of the bluster, the posturing, the propaganda has come down. And they've gotten the memo that, every statement that they make has to be backed up by verifiable evidence to support that statement. So I do think we're in a better place today. The regulators are cracking down here. And that is a global effort, but of course the US led the charge with the 4 enforcement actions against Bank of New York, Goldman Sachs, the mining company Vale, and of course DWS has been under investigation for the last couple of years. So I mean, I just think, right now we're not doing enough. Money is being mobilized certainly into, transition and clean technology investments. But until there's real, government crackdown and greater incentives, you're always going to have this mixed bag. Finance will continue to finance new fossil fuel projects.
Great. Thank you. I had a few other things to ask, but given the paucity of time, I'm just now going to open the floor for Q&A. So yeah, if we can have the mics or... Yeah, please go ahead. And if you can identify yourself, and if you have this question to a particular speaker, then please let us know. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You have a question? Is there a mic? No, there's no mic, so if you can just stand up and speak. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
With Menlo Energy Economics, the local consulting firm. Back to, I guess, the comments everybody made, and I hope you can hear me, but, we're going to this COP conference in November, and one of the largest oil and gas producers is chairing the conference. I mean, how much more absurd can it be? We're asking an oil and gas producer to talk and help us solve the climate issue?
Yeah.
Am I on? The question surrounded the upcoming COP conference, where the leadership of it is the fossil fuel sector, and when those groupings come together, what do we do when they are running leading it? And we know there won't be much progress coming out of it. I think the organizing work that many people have been doing needs to take a lot from what Ralph was talking about, and not to validate the misinformation that's coming out of there. We have a very big battle on that, but I think we should point that out and speak. Other question?
Another question. That's it. Or anybody of you want to further add to what just Tom said?
Okay. Good morning. I am Dr. D.C. Patra from India. My question is addressed to Madam Dajri. Okay, if I have understood and heard you clearly, you are saying that capital market may not be that coming forward to provide the solution of finance. It has to come from or through regulation. But I understand, as far as finance is concerned, one is capital market, second is multilateral financing agencies. Right. So, if you leave everything to regulation, regulation can only restrict the things. If we have to look at the economy, if we have to look at the transition has to transform to an open economy, where the market lies, where the globalization is tending towards, then we rely less on regulation and more on finance. Is my statement, observation, making any sense? Thank you.
For sure. What I would say is, for example, if we priced in negative externalities, right, fossil fuels, any sort of polluting company, right? The capital markets obviously is going to price that in. They're going to go, that will discount the value of those type of companies. So regulation, when we think of regulation, it's more, it's legislation, right? So that's both the carrot and the stick. The stick, in pricing negative externalities, the price of carbon, rules against supervision, and enforcement actions against greenwashing. And likewise, on the other side, there has to be incentives, right, to move into, a new transition economy. So that's how I see it. The capital markets will do a bit. And again, there's plenty of what's called blended finance transactions where the multilateral and bilateral development agencies work with private capital. But again, that's such a limited market. I mean, we need to unleash, the trillions of dollars. These type of transactions are in the billions. They're just not enough. That it does serve as a good model, but unfortunately, it's just not enough to solve the problem. So I do believe, right, with the right guardrails, which we're starting to see, we'll see, more investment, come through. But there are urgent problems. We need it now, right? We're just not moving fast enough, and that's where the only way we can move fast is with government action, just to kind of just rechannel, refocus the capital markets, and that's when you get the big bang.
Thanks. Thank you. Given that now we are closer to the end of the session, so if people have more questions, speakers are right here. You can approach them throughout the day. I mean, they are here, right? So great. With this, apologies for not taking up too many questions. So with this, I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you, especially to the distinguished panelists who have come and shared their views today. They have very rightly set the tone for deliberations for the remaining of the conference. And thank you all for coming and joining us. It's been great to have all of you. Hope you get to learn many new things, many new perspectives, and meet